Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophets Speak. Today we continue our study of the first book of Kings, that is Melachim Aleph. We are in the middle of chapter 20. In the first half of this chapter, we read of the incredible victory that Ahab led against the Aram, the people of Aram, who are led by their very vicious, bloodthirsty, untrustworthy king named Ben-Hadad, that had led a huge coalition against the people of Israel and threatened to destroy and burn and crush them, simply for the sake of destruction, because Ahab had already submitted to him and had already agreed to pay tribute to him. So it wasn't for money, it was simply bent on destruction and killing. But Ahab, in a miraculous victory, won and crushed the army of Aram, and they ended up going back to Aram, and Ahab was being advised in the first half of this chapter by a Navi, a prophet of God. And we finished off last time learning of the prophet warning Ahab that hang in there, because within a year he will be back. He will come back for vengeance. So v'avdei melech Aram omru elav, the servants of the king of Aram, and after he had retreated in defeat back to his capital in Damascus, his servants said to him as follows: Elahei harim Elohehem, their gods. They looked, it's kind of embarrassing, because they looked at the Israelites and saw that the Israelites had a bunch of gods. They didn't even recognize the Israelites as people of monotheism, which is what they should have been. Their gods are gods of mountains. One only imagines that so many events in the Torah and significant religious events in the history of the Jewish people occurred on mountains, especially the mountain of Sinai. So one would see that the people are, that their God appears to them on mountains. They sacrifice on top of mountains. So he's a God who's powerful in mountains. Al Kain Chazku Mimenu. That's why they overpowered us in the last engagement, in the last military engagement. Ulam, however, nilachem mitam b'mishar. If we would fight with them in a plain, in a valley, in a level area without mountains, certainly then we will be stronger than them. And this was the general mode of thinking in those days, that certain gods had powers over certain things, and our God is better in the plains. Let's get him there. And they advised the king as following: to get himself some better leaders, because remember last time they flopped because the kings were partying and getting drunk and didn't give their soldiers orders in time, so they ended up getting surprised. So this time, Haser HaMelachim Ish Mimikomo, take down those kings that are leading the forces like we did last time, V'sim Pachot Tachtehem, and appoint officers to lead the troops. So at least you'll get a real military performance, as opposed to a couple of drunken kings sitting around and partying and not understanding anything about military tactics and how to be ready for battle. And get yourself together an army as big as the army that you lost before, right? Sus, kasus, horse for horse, v'rechav k'rechav, and chariot for chariot. In other words, rebuild the lost army, v'nilachama osam b'mishar, and let's do a rematch. But this time in the plain. Imlo nechzak mehem, certainly we will be stronger than them. Vayishmalu kolam vayas kain, he followed their advice and did exactly as he was advised. Vayile teshuvat hashanah, it was when the year was changing. Apparently, whatever season this was at the time of year that it was good for, the weather conditions were right for battle. Vayifkod Ben-Hadad et Aram. Ben-Hadad gathered together and mustered the people of Aram. Vaya'al Afeka, and he went to Afeka l'melchama im Yisrael, to wage war against the people of Israel. Uvenei Yisrael, and the people of Israel, haspaktu, they mustered themselves, v'chalkalu, and they provisioned themselves. Vayelchu likrasam, and they went to against them in battle, to greet them in battle. Vayachnu b'nei Yisrael negdam, and they camped opposite them, kishnei chasifei zim, and they looked like two flocks of goats. Va'aram milu es haaretz. In other words, there was such a small number, they looked like just two flocks of goats in comparison to the army of Aram, which filled the entire land, the entire area. Vayigash isho Elohim, and a man of God approached. So here we have another Navi, another prophet, who is coming to inform Ahab. Vayomer Melech Yisrael, and he says to the king of Israel, Vayomer, and he says as follows: Ko amar Adonai, so says God, Ya'an asher omru Aram Elohei Harim Adonai. Because the people of Aram said that God is only a God of mountains, v'lo Elohei Amokimhu, and he's not the God of the deep, of the valleys. V'nosati es kol ha'amun hagadol hazeh biyadecha. That's why I am going to put this entire encampment, this entire massive army in your hands, vidatem, and you will all know ki ani Adonai, that I am God, period. God over everywhere, God over everything. So they had made this into a theological war, and God said, I'm not losing this theological war. So you have the Navi is telling Ahab that God is going to make sure that you will win. So Ahab should walk into this battle knowing that he will win, but he will win because it's for God's honor. Vayachanu eile nochach eile shivas yamim, and each camp was camped opposite each other for 7 days. Vayihi bayom hashvi, and it was on the 7th day. Vatikrav hamilchama, and the battle broke out between the two groups. Vayaku v'nei Yisrael et Aram 100,000 ragli biyom echad. And the people of Israel struck down 100,000 foot soldiers of Aram in one day. A massive victory. Vayanusu hanosorim afeko el ha'ir. And the remainder, the refugees, the ones who survived the battle, ran towards the city of Afeka. And they sought refuge within the city walls. Vatipol hachoma. And the city walls collapsed al esrim v'shiva elef ish hanosarim, on top of the 27,000 people that were left. Whether the impression is here that it was some kind of miraculous collapse, it doesn't say here that the people knocked the walls down. Ben-Hadad, Nus, and the king Ben-Hadad himself ran vayavo el ha'ir, and he came into the city cheder b'cheder, in some inner chamber, some inner room that somehow didn't get destroyed by the collapsing of the walls. Vayomrei elav avadav, and the servants that were with him in this inner chamber of Ben-Hadad said to him, Hinei na shamanu, we've heard, it's known, ki malchei beis Yisrael, that the kings of the house of Israel, ki malchei chesed heim, that they are kind kings, that they are very, the word often used in translation is magnanimous. They're nice people. They're the kinds that might not just kill you with vengeance. Nasimas nasakim b'masnenu. Let's try to appeal to him, to his merciful side. This makes one think that they probably had known of the episode of Saul and Agag keeping the king of Agag of Amalek alive. So they're thinking, well, maybe they can spare our king too. Let's put on sackcloth over, wrapped around our waist, v'chavolim b'roshenu, ropes upon our heads. Let's dress up in a way that makes us appear humble, that makes us appear like we are regret what we've done. V'neitzei al melech Yisrael, and let's go out and greet the king and surrender to him. Ulai yichayet nafshecha, maybe he will keep you alive. In other words, right now there's no other hope. If we fight, we're done, and we really don't have any hope. So vayachkeru sakim b'masnehem. So they dressed the way they described, in sackcloth, v'chavolim b'rashehem, and ropes around their head. Vayavohu el melech Yisrael, and they came out to the king of Israel. Vayomer, and they said, Avducha Ben-Hadad, your servant Ben-Hadad Omar. They didn't have the king go out right away, afraid, of course, that he might just chop his head off. But instead, the servants came out first, and begged him as follows: "Your servant Ben-Hadad, T'chi no nafshi," he said, "please let me live." Vayomer. And then Achav's response, and this is very curious, was, "Ha'odenu chai? Is he still alive? Achihu, he is my brother." Now this is a very fascinating response, and it makes one think, why did Achav respond this way? The one logical way for him to have responded, after the way Ben-Hadad behaved in such a vicious and ruthless way, right, would have been to take revenge and kill him now that Achav had the upper hand. However, Achav saw in Ben-Hadad some kinship. He's a guy like me. And as we've seen a little bit so far, and we're going to see more, Achav was a fellow ruthless, murderous man. And Achav sees Ben-Hadad as an ally with whom he can work. They were both idolaters. They were both ruthless murderers. And Achav saw an alliance with Ben-Hadad as something that can be very beneficial to him. So just the very fact that he saw Ben-Hadad as a brother, we will see soon, the prophet of God was very upset with him for doing this. And Achav is going to be punished for this, which we'll see in just a moment. But this reaction is seen by God and told through his prophets to be an extremely bad reaction. Achav should have done what either would have been logical, would have been to kill the king, because that's how you completely and utterly win a battle. And this was a just battle. The Israelites were being attacked. They were threatened with annihilation. Or at least hold him hostage in order to ask the prophet what to do with him. But to say, Achihu, he's my brother, when he's this vicious, awful person, the one who said, I am going to, just telling me that you are my vassal is not enough. I'm going to destroy you. I'm going to take away your women and your children and your riches and everything. This is a vicious man. Achihu, he's my brother. But that's how Achav answered. And these men, verse 33, immediately recognized, they understood what's going on here. They understood that Achav identified with Ben-Hadad. He saw him as an ally that he can use to further his nefarious plans. And they immediately, vayachlatu hamimenu, and they understood, based on the words that he had said, hamimenu, that which came from him, vayomru achicha Ben-Hadad, they said, yes, your brother. They immediately switched from your servant Ben-Hadad to your brother Ben-Hadad. Vayomer bohu kachu, and he said, come, bring it in, bring him to me. Vayetzei elav Ben-Hadad, and they brought him in. They brought him out of the room where he was hiding. Vayaleo al merkava, and they put him up on the king's chariot. So Achav is really groveling to this terrible, terrible human being, and putting him in his chariot. And immediately, Vayomer elav, Ben-Hadad says to Achav, He'arim asher lakach avi me'es avicha, the cities that my father took in battle from your father, Ashiv, I will return them to you. V'chutzos tasim lecha, and you can set up marketplaces for your goods. B'Damesek, in my capital, Damascus, kasher samavi b'Shomron, in the same way that my father forced upon you markets for his goods in Shomron, you can now sell your goods there. So, in other words, this is a good alliance. I'm going to give you back your towns because you're doing me such favor, and you can set up markets, sell your goods. This will be a huge way for you to make profit. Va'ani babrita shalacheka, and I, presumably this is now Achav speaking, I will send you away with a covenant, a covenant meaning an alliance. That's that when we separate, we will have this alliance together. Vayichras lo bris, and they signed an alliance. Vayishalchei, and he sent him away. Interestingly enough, presumably this alliance is testified. We have archaeological evidence of this alliance in the Kirch monolith, which is a document found in Assyria. The Assyrian Empire, which was not yet a major force, was in its early days at this time, and the Assyrian Empire, that's Assyrian with an A, was led by Shalmaneser III at around this time. And in this document, which can currently be seen in the British Museum, he states there that he waged war against a consortium of kings, and he lists an alliance between Ben-Hadad of Aram and Ahab of Israel that were allied against him. So this alliance between them is actually attested to in extra-biblical sources, in documents that have been found archaeologically, which is something very interesting. Okay, so here he makes this alliance, and now one of the people from the Bnei HaNeviim, the people, sons of or students of the prophets, Omar el Re'ehu, said to one of his friends, in other words, presumably another member of the prophets, or the students of the prophets, Bidvar Adonai, I received a prophecy from God, Hakenina, asking me to ask you to hit me, strike me, Vayima'ena ish lahakoso. But the person, despite knowing that he was being told by a prophet, a real true prophet of God, that he had to strike him, and we'll see in a minute why he wanted him to strike him, he says he refused to do it. Presumably, I can't hit you, I'm not a kind of guy that hits people. But even though this was a command from God, which is something that he should have listened to, Vayomer lo, and he said to him, Yan asher lo shamata b'kol Adonai, because you didn't listen to the instruction of God, Hin chaholech me'iti, you're going to step away from me, ve'ikcha ha'aryeh, and a lion will strike you down, Vayelech me'etzlo, and that's what happened, Vayimtso'ehu ha'aryeh vayakeu, and a lion found him and struck him down. So then Vayimtso ish acher, he finds another man, Vayomer hakenina, and he says, strike me. This man listened, Vayakeu ha'ish hakeu potsoa. He struck him down in a way that he was wounded, that he was hurt, and limping. It was obvious that he was hurt and injured. We're going to see in a moment what's the point of all this. So here now you have a wounded prophet who is Vayelech hanavi, and the prophet went Vayamod lamelech al hadarach, and he stood at the side of the road, Vayitzchapes ba'afer al einav, and he waited for the king by the side of the road. He's waiting for the king. We're up to verse 39. Vayihi hamelech over, and the king was passing by. This was after the battle, and after he had made this deal with Ben-Hadad. V'hu tza'ak el hamelech, and he cried out to the king. And he's wearing this disguise that we mentioned before, that he was covered by he covered himself up. Vayomer abducha yotza b'kerev hamilchama. Your servant, I just came out of the war, and that's explaining the reason for his injury. V'hinei ish sar, and a person came towards me, vayaveh elai ish, and they brought me a man, presumably a captive, maybe an enemy captive. Vayomer shemar eshoit hazeh, guard this man and hold him. Im hipaked, because if he gets lost, and then I will take your life instead of his. He's a very important captive. You need to keep guard over him. Or by a really large sum of money, you can redeem yourself. And I was doing my things. I was doing this business and that business. And he escaped. The guy came back and he wasn't here. I totally messed up. I missed my job. And the king said to him, Kain mishpatecha atocha ratzta. You have told me what the verdict is, right? In other words, you're asking me for help in your problem. Listen, man, you messed up. You deserve death or pay your way out. So vayimaher vayasara ta'efer. Immediately, this prophet pulled the cloth away from his face, and immediately the king recognized him that he was one of the prophets. Apparently he was a prominent one of the prophets. And the king said, and the prophet said to the king, Ko Amar Adonai, so says God, Yan shilachta et ish chermi miyad, because you have set free that man who I had doomed, presumably I had doomed to death. Your soul will be taken, your life will be taken instead of his, and your nation will lose instead of his. In other words, how could you let him go? Remember, Ahab let him go because Ahab had selfish desires and desires of grandeur, and felt a kinship with this man who was an absolute murderer, an absolutely evil person. Letting such a person go is not being magnanimous and nice, it's being foolish and dangerous. And Ahab, instead of responding, instead of saying, I'm sorry, instead of anything, Vayelech Melech Yisrael Biso, the king of Israel went back home, Sar v'zo'ef, upset and disappointed and anxious, Vayavo Shomron, and he came back to the capital of Shomron. This concludes this chapter. We're going to study more of the events of Ahab and his kingdom in the next chapter. Thank you so much for studying chapter 20 together. Looking forward to studying chapter 21 and this entire book together. Have a wonderful day.